The 3DO Interactive Multiplayer was a 32-bit console originally released in October of 1993 by Panasonic. It retailed for a whopping $699.99, which translates to roughly $1,500 in today's money. It was the brainchild of Trip Hawkins, the founder of Electronic Arts, who would go on to run the 3DO company and be the architect of its business strategy. Essentially, Mr. Hawkins convinced his business partners to make the 3DO hardware his company had designed, assuming all the risk in the process. It was an unmitigated disaster. After launching at one of the highest prices for a console ever, there was only one game available, the pack-in Crash and Burn. It would be months before more games were released, extinguishing any momentum the platform may have had as one of the first 32-bit options available on the North American market. Since Panasonic basically relied on the price of the hardware alone to make any money from it, the entire concept was doomed right from the start. Gold Star and Sanyo would eventually make 3DO alternatives that were much cheaper, but the early stumbles impacted the 3DO's appeal so heavily, nothing could pull it out of the downward spiral it was in pretty much from day one. By the time the price of the hardware lowered and games started coming in around mid-1994, the head start was completely worthless, with Saturn and PlayStation mere months away in places like Japan. In this episode, we will be locking in the time machine once again, sending me back to right the wrongs of the 3DO. What would I do differently? Let's find out. The 3DO is one of the most unique consoles ever released because of the way it was created, manufactured, and licensed. Trip Hawkins and his 3DO company designed the thing, passing off manufacturing to outside entities. The 3DO company would then make money on each hardware unit sold, as well as each software unit sold. This meant that the companies that made the physical 3DO hardware had to make money on the device itself. That's why Panasonic charged so much at its release. Unlike Sega or Nintendo, who could make up the monies lost on hardware thanks to their own software, Panasonic had no additional income sources at the time. After it was clear the 3DO was not going to sell for $700, Panasonic lowered the price of the unit to $500 in April of 1994. We can glean an enormous amount of information on how not to release a console from this example. Trip Hawkins must have been one hell of a salesman because he basically sold a blueprint for a console everyone else would have to assume the risk for, while he sat back and collected money from the idea. Changing any of that would mean having to go through multiple companies to get it done. So my first step is to come at this from a strictly Panasonic point of view. They made the first 3DO system, and they were one of the biggest electronic companies in the world. Regardless of the other manufacturers that would come along later, without Panasonic, there is no 3DO console. That means with me in control at Panasonic, step 1 is to buy the 3DO company, all its assets and technology, and leave Trip Hawkins installed as its president. This would have a two-pronged effect. First, it gives Panasonic full control over the 3DO Interactive Multiplayer and removes the middleman from the equation. Second, it will establish the 3DO company as Panasonic's internal software maker and publishing arm for the new console. All of this would need to be done back in 1992, so it gives us enough time to develop the launch games we need and adjust some of the hardware so it meets our new vision. I feel there is no reality in which the 3DO company can refuse this offer. Trip Hawkins is on record saying they needed either Sony or Matsushita to make the 3DO a reality, and with Sony going the PlayStation route, we are in a perfect position of power and advantage. For 1993 technology, the 3DO was actually a fairly well-designed piece of kit. This thing brought home textured mapped polygons at a time when we were just starting to see them in the arcade. It was powered by a 32-bit ARM60 CPU at 12.5 MHz. a graphics chip called Madam that had its own math coprocessor that was capable of 3D polygons, 2D sprites, backgrounds, scaling, rotation, and could produce 16 million pixels a second. It had 2 megabytes of total RAM and a dual-speed CD-ROM. This thing was no slouch back then, and though it would be surpassed by the Saturn and PlayStation in terms of power, the 3DO was released nearly 2 years earlier in North America. I am pretty content with that, and the changes we are making here are mostly small and meant to give us a better manufacturing position and the potential to make more money. The first change is moving the second controller port off of the controller and onto the console itself. I always hated this about the 3DO, and the impact of cost should be negligible since we are simply moving it from one place to another. We will also be dropping the headphone jack from the controller. I know this was a great feature and way ahead of its time, but the money we make on accessories and lowering the price of our controllers is far more important. 3DO pads were originally $50 at retail, and without the extra ports, we should be able to get that down to around $30. We will also be gutting the internal save memory of the 3DO and replacing them with memory cards. The 3DO has an expansion port, and this will allow us to sell small and affordable save cards that look similar to the ones available on the Neo Geo. Figure these little guys could sell for $20 and provide us an extra source of revenue. We are also dropping the motorized tray on the CD-ROM. This is a cool feature, but not worth the hit to our overall cost of manufacturing. A top loader will get the job done, and it will also allow us to slim up the FZ1 design a bit, further bringing down costs. Since Panasonic now has full control over the 3DO and has an internal developer and publisher for it, we need more games. Launching with a single game, which also was the free pack-in, was absolutely crazy for such an expensive device. That entire year leading up to the launch of the 3DO, Panasonic needs to have multiple games in development and ready for release. Our acquisition of the 3DO company will see us building multiple internal teams to work on these projects. If Panasonic is to make a serious go at the console market, we need the ability to make games that will help sell our hardware. Our first target is to secure a source of game licenses that we can bank on. Even Sega and Nintendo pulled from other companies when they needed more games, and the 3DO will be no different. Around the time of the 1993 launch, the fighting game genre is extremely popular, so we need a relationship with Capcom immediately. We will license and release Street Fighter II Arcade Edition for our October 1993 launch. This game is of paramount importance in establishing the 3DO is not only a major player, but also a source of the best arcade ports you can get at home. Depending on how the license is structured, Street Fighter II Arcade Edition will basically be the original, Champion Edition, and Turbo all rolled up into one game. We will also license Cadillacs and Dinosaurs for a home port. No other console had it, and I feel it will look great in a 1993 lineup, especially with those bright, colorful graphics. This early relationship with Capcom will also hopefully lead to other projects down the line. We also need a strong sports game at launch, so we will be establishing a relationship with Midway, Williams, and Acclaim. We will secure the license for Super High Impact to get our football fans excited. This one was loud, violent, and used digitized graphics and sound for a more realistic presentation. This will also hopefully open the door for NBA Jam and Mortal Kombat the following year. Sega is no stranger to license deals, and we will be going after Radmobile and Strike Fighter. These games use sprite scaling but appear very 3D in the way they move, so I think they will do well for us in 1993. It's also important to establish a relationship with Sega as a means to possibly get more of their arcade titles in the future. There's no reason why we can't work towards getting Virtua Racing in 1994. With the PC games market starting to come up with some huge hits in 1993, I think it's important to try and score a few licenses from there as well. Something like The Seventh Guest would look great on our hardware and should be relatively easy to port over due to the pre-rendered nature. We could also go after King's Quest VI or Return to Zork to help fill that Western niche for adventure. Some of the initial titles available for the 3DO, like Alone in the Dark, garnered a fair bit of attention, so I feel it's worth the effort to get teams together to make similar games happen. Our next order of business is to develop at least 2 original titles that will be linked to the 3DO brand. Gex was considered a mascot for the 3DO, but wasn't released until over a year after the 3DO launched. We need a mascot before that. It would be easy to buy one of the many characters that already exist, but if the 3DO is to be unique, we need something we created. Our second game needs to be in a genre we don't have and is popular, particularly in Japan. That's going to be a hybrid Japanese RPG and dating sim. We'll set it up with characters and a story that is aimed at a slightly older crowd, with real-world problems and a much more mature theme. I'm not talking nudity here, but more serious consequences for your choices, like lost friends and permadeath. All these games should give us a solid release list and give our third parties time to show up. The launch of the 3DO will be incredibly important to us. We need magazine ads, TV spots, and enough buzz to generate a healthy word of mouth. We start by keeping the original launch date of October 4th, 1993. With our strategy changing so radically and our new internal teams producing games, we can price our unit much more aggressively. The 3DO will launch for $399 with the pack-in Crash and Burn. It will also include a playable demo with a small segment of gameplay from all of our launch software. And speaking of, our launch software list includes Street Fighter II Arcade Edition, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, Radmobile, Strike Fighter, Super High Impact, King's Quest, The Seventh Guest, as well as our 2 internally owned titles, the Mascot Platformer and our mature-themed RPG. Third-party games start flowing heavily in early 1994, so we have time before our second round of releases are due. Our reduced price should also get us into more retail stores. We target all the big box retailers, the toy stores, game shops, and even the electronic and AV outlets. We make sure every state has a major company that carries our products. Panasonic is huge and already has the partnerships and distribution in place to make this a reality. $399 is still a very high price for a console at this time, so this will not be an easy battle. Our software needs to be well made, and our advertising needs to be relevant. The importance of Electronic Arts to the 3DO brand is huge. Electronic Arts alone is responsible for a large percentage of the must-own titles for the device. This relationship needs to be cultivated, expanded, and nurtured. Not only do we need all the great games Electronic Arts made for the 3DO originally, but we also need more. Even if Electronic Arts doesn't make them themselves, we need a relationship where we can commission a team and publish it ourselves. 3DO versions of their basketball and baseball games should be expected. Digitized and bloodier versions of Mutant League football and hockey are an absolute must. We'll also bring over action titles like Jungle Strike. There will be a 3DO Skitchin using the 32-bit Road Rash graphics engine. With Trip Hawkins leading up our business push, his relationship with Electronic Arts should make working with them far more agreeable. The reality is that Panasonic may have to invest time and money to secure these titles, but any serious attempt at establishing the 3DO as a contender should bring those expectations. The original 3DO plan didn't have Panasonic's full commitment. That needs to change if we're going to succeed. In 1993, the PC Engine market is in steep decline in Japan, and virtually non-existent anyplace else. It had a good run, but the battle between Sega and Nintendo has completely engulfed the 16-bit console market, making it a two-horse race. I want NEC and Hudson on the side of the 3DO. I'd go so far as to make them a special partner where they can make their own hardware and software at reduced fees. The aim is to get them away from the PCFX idea and make the 3DO their next 32-bit console. We would likely need to start this relationship in 1992 before significant investment into the PCFX began. NEC and Hudson collectively have a ton of software and IPs that would greatly benefit the 3DO. Sequels and new additions to popular PC Engine releases would go a very long way to greater success in Japan, which in turn means more third-party support, which then brings more options to be released in Western territories. My sales pitch is to reference the PC Engine and TurboGrafx experiment and focus on the importance of partnerships when dealing with the extreme cost of competing in console space. With 3DO technology already done, relaxed licensing fees, and a retail and manufacturing roadmap already in place, I hope to convince NEC and Hudson to go all in with the 3DO. We could see the likes of a new Bonk's Adventure, a 3D update to Military Madness, a brand new adventure in Newtopia. A Polygon Blazing Lasers entry could be something else. Multiplayer Bomberman would be a must. There are many others, but you get the idea. To compete in the console market takes a massive investment, and with a stronger group, we stand a greater chance of success. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of how I would have handled the 3DO interactive multiplayer. I really do feel that the original strategy for this console was flawed right from the get-go. There were too many moving parts and separate entities in place. It led to no software being available at the beginning. It led to an obscene asking price on day one. It led to no real structure being in place to deal with everything a console needs to deal with. This was crazy when you think about it. Panasonic and its parent Matsushita were billion-dollar corporations. Had their focus been on making the 3DO a legitimate contender in the console market, it should have happened. The simple truth is that there needed to be a singular, hyper-focused business model behind the 3DO. That company needed control over the hardware. It needed to have software divisions making games and securing licenses that would be ready on day one. It needed to be making the deals that assured the broad support of as many third parties as possible. Panasonic was big enough to do all of these things. They had the assets, the connections, the partnerships, and the global footprint to push 3DO as a must-own device. While reading up on the 3DO for this video, I found an interview with Trip Hawkins that I feel says it all about my strategy here. In an article for Next Generation magazine in 1996, he was asked, what was the right way to do the 3DO? He said, it doesn't work very well if you have a sort of patchwork quilt with these guys doing the hardware, and these guys doing the software, and these guys managing the licensing program. What you need is a company that's a driving force, a company that makes, markets, and sells the product, and also supplies enough of the key software to really get the format going until the third parties come in. Tripp learned that the hard way, and I think he's exactly right. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.